Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Fire with Dr. Ninja Turtle. I am live and ready to go with talking about the buy, borrow, die strategy. So, excuse me, I have a little cough in the throat there. Try and drink some coffee. I take my allergy pills early in the morning, but I guess they didn't kick in fast enough to get rid of that cough in my throat there. And so as you can see, I'm still in my RV this week. And what we're talking about, let me start the poll. And first of all, I'm going to say hi to Tiger. I saw your comments in the comments, but I couldn't access the comments because I had the poll already set and just ready to be clicked on when I started the live. So, what we're talking about here is the buy, borrow, die strategy. And the question is this just for the ultra wealthy? Do they know something that we don't know? And the answer to that is that this is not just for the ultra wealthy. This strategy is for everyone. And so people, the ultra wealthy like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and all of these people, Jeff Bezos, they are using the buy, borrow, die strategy to pass down their wealth to their heirs. And we can all use that strategy. So, so is this strategy just for billionaires? Hi, DeFam Adventures. Thank you for stopping through. I appreciate everybody that stops through and just says hi. So, in this live, we are going to, and please watch the replay, like and subscribe if you haven't already. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the risks of the buy, borrow, die strategy. I'm going to make sure I cover that because this is not financial advice. I'm talking about some of the things that I've done in my financial wealth building strategy, but also I want to talk about the things that you can do. And no, you do not have to be ultra wealthy to pass down your assets to your heirs paying very little in taxes. Good morning, Tiger. So let me tell you my personal story with this. And it was a year or two ago, maybe a little bit more. I was watching a YouTube video, Sharon Winsmith. I think she was an attorney or an investment person. And she talked about the buy, borrow, die strategy. And that was the first time that I had heard of it. Now, how does that apply to my life? Because a lot of times people use this strategy with their stocks that they have in the stock market. Because I don't know if you know that you can borrow against your stocks and then pay that money back, but never sell the stocks that you have. And that sort of gets into the thing that Elon Musk does, or some of the people that, like Peter Thiel, who have tons of stock in different companies that's worth millions or billions, and they don't want to sell their stock every time they want to buy a house or buy a car or whatever the case may be. So, what they do is they borrow against their stocks. Well, that's not my story because I don't have a lot in the stock market, right? I hope to build it up, right? I am now watching Lisa J. Stocks. And so she talks a lot about stocks in the stock market and individual stocks and ETFs that she owns and dividend paying stocks that she owns. And I'm going to get into that. I'm learning from her and I'm going to invest more and more over time and diversify some out of real estate. I will always be heavy in real estate. However, I will over time diversify some of my assets away from just pure real estate. But let's talk about how I use the buy, borrow, die strategy in my real estate investing because, as I said, this strategy is available to anyone. And how I use it is I am currently, as we speak, right now, applying for a refinance. Now, I'm going to be honest, I applied for a refinance at the beginning of this month, October, and it did not go well. The bank undervalued my properties. And so I did not get the appraisals that I wanted. And so I am attempting, which has not been finished yet, so I don't know how this is going to end up, but I am applying at a different bank for that refinance. And when I say refinance, normally, and this is what I've always done in the past, so this is the first time that I'm doing this new sort of part of the buy, borrow, die strategy. In the past, when I refinance, I do not take cash out. I normally just refinance for whatever I owe on the loan, which basically lowers my payments, which increases my monthly cash flow. And that's one of my priorities as I get older is to increase monthly cash flow. However, this particular refinance, I am trying to pull some cash out because I need some cash for various different reasons. And this is the buy, borrow, die strategy. And real estate investors use this to pay off loans. They use it to pay back investors. I don't have investors, I'm just a sole owner. But if you look at Ken McElroy, he's got a YouTube channel, and he's a billionaire who owns a lot of rental apartment buildings. He has 10,000 tenants or residents in his apartment buildings. But he has a partner. And so he started out in property management, and now he started buying and building with his partner all of these things. Now, one of the things that he does is he takes investors' money to buy these properties. And then over time, he does a cash out refi, and he can pay back his investors the amount of money that they invested in the property. And they still get future rental income. So it's not that he pays them back and they're out. He pays them back their initial investment, plus they get residual income for as long as he owns that property. So, what I'm trying to share here is that this is the first time that I'm doing a cash out refi. And I will be doing more refis probably when interest rates come down more at the beginning of 2026. However, they will not be cash out refis. They will just be refinances at lower interest rates so that I lower my payments and increase my monthly cash flow. So let's go back to the buy, borrow, die strategy. So what I'm doing is I'm borrowing money from my assets. Now, when you borrow money from your assets, whether it is real estate or whether it is stocks in the stock market, you do not pay taxes because you have not sold anything. So there's no capital gains. So let's get into each of these, which is the first one is buy. So you want to buy appreciating assets. And that's the big point here. Not all of your assets are always going to appreciate. We need to sort of put that out there on the table. Good morning, T. Great to see you. That when you buy assets, either in the stock market or real estate or even in your 401k, the stock market is not always going to go straight up. Yes, it goes up over time, over any 10-year period or 20-year period. If you're invested for 10 or 20 years, your chances, oh, good morning, Mommy Money Getter is here. Oh, fabulous. So when you're investing in the stock market for 10 years or 20 years, it's pretty safe that you are not going to lose money. You may not make a ton, but you're not going to lose your money. But my point is that your assets do not always go up. Good morning, Jeffrey. Great to see you. So, what you want to do is you want to buy appreciating assets. Now, what does that really mean? It means that if you're buying things like cars, they go down in value. If you're buying something like a stock, or even a stock with a dividend, as Lisa J. Stocks does, she also buys other stocks and stuff, so that she doesn't just invest in dividends. But the point is, sometimes a dividend paying stock gives you that dividend, which is income. However, the stock may not rise as much as a stock that does not give you a dividend. So you want to buy appreciating assets. And through these appreciating assets, you want to hold them until they grow. And again, that means we're in this for the long term. I didn't buy real estate to buy it and flip it, buy it and flip it. I am buy and hold. In theory, I will hold all of my real estate unless I do a 1031 exchange where I'm selling some piece of real estate without taking the money. We give it to a custodian, and then you get the money back when you buy something else. That's the 1031 exchange. So I can sell a property and use my proceeds from that sale, not pay any taxes, and reinvest that and buy a bigger property or multiple properties with the capital gains. That's one way, but that's a different topic for a different day. But my point is, I plan to hold all of my real estate forever. And what happens is I can borrow as that real estate gains value. I have more and more equity in my real estate. Now, the real estate that I have about 50% equity. I am not stressed where I have 10% equity that if the market drops, I'm going to have to sell. I should never ever have to sell. I would like to start paying off more properties so that I have even more equity. But think about that. If I have equity in those properties, I can borrow against the equity, use that money, and not pay taxes on that. Now, if I borrow against that money, that loan has to be paid back. Well, who really pays the loan? Is it me, or is it my rental income from my rental properties that actually pays back the loan? See, and so that's where people sort of get sidetracked, is they think that it's their responsibility. For example, if I had Social Security, would I be paying back a loan from my rental properties using my Social Security income? No. I would not borrow so much money from my rental properties that my rental income could not cover that loan. So I'm borrowing cash. I'm taking that cash out. I could use the cash for multiple reasons. I could use it to invest in more real estate and grow my cash flow. Someone could use it to buy more stocks. Now, is that risky? Yes. I would not use it for any risky purposes, because if the stock goes down, remember, they can call your loan, and if your stock goes down, they can just sell the stocks that you pledged for that loan. So I'm not big on using this strategy in the stock market. However, a lot of people do. And if you have a lot of money in the stock market, let's say hundreds of thousands of dollars, or you're a millionaire, or whatever the case may be, and you're only borrowing out of your million in the stock market $100,000. You're not trying to borrow $500,000, but you're borrowing $100,000 to buy more stocks. Well, you could, and Tiger brought up a good point here, is that you could, and people have done this, you could borrow money from your stocks And again, don't do it risky where you're borrowing a lot, a high percentage of your stocks. At least I wouldn't. Okay, that's just me. I'm conservative and I would never do it for my real estate, wouldn't do it with my stocks. I would borrow a small percent, maybe 10%, and use that money to buy real estate. So you're borrowing from your stock portfolio, which you've built over the years, and it's gone up in value as well. And now you're borrowing money from that to buy a rental property, and your rental property is cash flowing to pay back that loan that you borrowed from your stocks. If that makes any sense at all, you're building wealth using assets that you already have. And so, as long as you never as long as you never sell those stocks or don't sell the real estate, there are no taxes. And so, basically, you could have tax free income for different reasons, whatever those reasons may be. Would someone go out and buy a boat? Yes, they could go out and buy a boat. A boat is a depreciating asset, so you don't really want to take your money and do that, or at least I wouldn't. Okay, I'm not telling you what to do, but I would not. Now, would I take the money to pay down debt? Yes. That's one of the reasons that I'm doing this cash out refi is that one, I want to build an emergency prudent reserve, and also I want to pay off some small debts that I have. Can I do that? Yes. Will this loan application with this new bank work? I don't know. I will tell everybody in a future live how that turned out. So we talked about buy. You buy assets. And I've talked about this in the past. Always be buying. You know, I tell my friends I'm not buying any more real estate. I have enough real estate to last me the rest of my life. All I need to do is pay it off, and then I'll have plenty of cash every month, cash flow for the rest of my life. Well, I keep buying real estate. And my friends look at me and they say, Daryl, I remember the last time you said you weren't going to buy any more real estate. And here you are buying more real estate. So it happens, you know. And so someone might say, well, I'm not putting any more money in the stock market. I have plenty of money in the stock market. Well, your money makes money in the stock market. Once you buy enough stock, your stock gets reinvested and buys you more stock. And so you all know my philosophy is buy assets. Now, your assets are supposed to pay for your liabilities. And that's part of what this buy, borrow, die strategy does. If you have a liability, like I have some small loans, my assets can pay off those small loans. And again, who pays back that? Well, it's my rental properties that pay it back over time. So, and again, there's no capital gains unless you're selling something. And that's why this strategy is so powerful. And again, this is not just for the billionaires. Yes, they know this strategy and they do not share it with most people. And until I heard Sharon Winsmith on YouTube talk about it, I didn't know about it. And I didn't realize that I could do it even as a small investor in real estate. I could use this strategy. Will I use it in the future? Most likely, because I'm not selling any of my real estate. So let's talk about the borrow part. We talked about buy, which is buy assets. Buy as many assets as you can. Whether you stock market, real estate, gold, doesn't matter what you buy. You know, some people are into crypto, right? It doesn't matter what you buy as long as you understand what it is that you're buying. Buy what's comfortable for you. For me, it's real estate, as you know, and so I'm comfortable there. That's just what I do. So let's say, and you know, not everybody's going to have $10 million. So let's go with $1 million. Let's say that you have $1 million And you can borrow against that $1 million, never sell your $1 million in stock. And I'm using stocks because a lot of people understand that, and not a lot of people understand real estate. So if you have $1 million in the stock market, that $1 million is going to grow at 8% a year, 8 to 10, right? So out of that $1 million, you could make $100,000 a year if everything is growing and you're reinvesting that money. Well, if you borrow 20,000 or 30,000 or even 50,000 a year, you're still growing that portfolio by 50,000 a year. Now, you have to take into account inflation. We don't want everybody to say I'm not accounting for all kinds of different things that happen. So inflation comes in, so your money is worth less over time. However, if you have $1 million in the stock market, and it doesn't matter if you have 100,000 in the stock market, it's still going to grow. So this strategy is good for everybody. The point is, grow your assets as much as possible. So where do we start? We start with $10,000. Then we grow that to $100,000. Then you grow that to $1 million. You just keep growing and keep investing. As time goes on, you now have enough assets where you can borrow against them and still pay them back at a lower interest rate than what you could borrow money from on the outside. Now, what you do with that money is up to you. I would always use borrowed money to increase my net worth, or I use borrowed money to buy more assets, which brings me money. So you're always increasing your wealth. You're always doing things that will increase your wealth. So let's take me. I'm going to use this money that I get from the rentals and the refinance to pay off debt. Well, if I pay off that debt, what am I going to use? What am I going to do with the money that I was using to pay off that debt? I'm going to invest that money. I'm not going to say, well, I now don't have debt, so let's just go spend the money. I'm not going to do that. I am going to treat myself a little bit because we are in life to enjoy life. And I'm getting to a point now where I really want to start spending more in retirement to enjoy myself. Am I still going to normally live on $900 a month? Yes. We've talked about that before. And I'm going to show that this month, I think I can get to the $900 a month in spending. So we'll see what happens at the end of October. But I'm on track. I'm on track to do my $900 a month. However, I am planning future travel because in retirement, I want to travel, I want to enjoy life, and I really want to treat myself because I have saved and I have invested and I have a high savings rate, because what that does is it invests more into assets, meaning I can borrow more from my assets in the future. See, it all circles around. Yeah, now Tiger and his wife, they are going to travel. If you haven't gone to his channel, go see his new setup that he has. It's an overlander. And so he and his wife and their dogs are going to travel. And they're going to get out and see this country. And I may follow them in the future. I may try and get myself some kind of little itty bitty sprinter van because I can't drive big vehicles. I just can't. Because I'm worried about them staying inside the lines of the road. But I could do like a little sprinter van, and just travel the country in that. So who knows what my future is, but if I have the assets, I don't have to sell. I can just borrow against the assets and let my assets pay back the loan from my assets. So that's borrowing. And that's where the magic really happens. So when you're borrowing against something that's going up in value, and again, you've got to be careful. If your stock goes down in value, let's say there's some kind of partial market crash or something like that, you could be in real trouble. Because I own 50% of my real estate, I have a lot of equity. The chances of real estate going down 50% is close to zero, especially in my case, because my rental properties, I make plenty to cover the loans, the insurance, and property taxes. So I'm going to be okay. No bank is going to call my loan, and I'm still making payments. So it's not going to go down so much that I'm not going to be able to make the payments. Let me tell you a little side story. And everybody sit down. This is where I go off to the left and just start prattling on about nothing. Is when I started buying real estate, I was very conservative. I never wanted to get myself into a situation where I would have to sell the real estate in a panic situation. So what I did was I always made sure that I could pay for my real estate even if I had no renters in the property. That's just my way of being conservative. Now I'm at a point now, and I've grown my real estate portfolio to a point now where I cannot pay all of the real estate loan if my renters didn't pay. But I have enough renters that if some renters don't pay, the other renters cover it. So I've sort of gradually moved out of the more conservative state. But I've always kept a lot of equity because equity is your friend. You do not want to be so leveraged that if any little hiccup happens, you're out of the game. You don't want to do that. Or I didn't want to do that. And so therefore I grew my portfolio in a very conservative way so that it sustains itself. And I've always made sure that either I can pay the entire mortgage without renters, or the renters cover themselves and the rental properties cover themselves. And now I'm at a point where my rental properties can buy me more rental properties without me having to put out money from my W 2 income or from my pension, or when I get Social Security, from my Social Security. So now we've talked about the borrow stage, and we've also talked about the cautions of if the stock market drops or rental housing prices drop, you still have to make those payments. So do not, oh, hi Shadow Scout Swede, you do not want to get yourself in a situation where you cannot make those payments. And again, keep this in mind, when you pledge stocks in the stock market, if the stock market tanks, the bank that you pledged those stocks to that gave you the loan will just sell your stock to cover that loan. So that is something to really be careful about. Meaning, I'm not saying you can't do it. What I'm saying is don't do it so high. Like do a small percentage. That's what I would do. And someday if I ever have like $1 million in stocks, I'd borrow 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, but I would never borrow $300,000. If that's 30% of my portfolio, I would never do such a thing because I'm Mr. Scaredy Cat. I'm Mr. Conservative here. And I don't ever want to risk my assets. So we'll take this example. I have $1 million in the stock market and I have $1 million in real estate. Well, if the stock market crashes and I have to pay back that loan in my stocks, I would have my rental properties to cover that. See, I always have a backup in case. So I wouldn't borrow the money unless I had a guaranteed backup way to cover that in case everything went south. Hi, Andy. Great to see you. So that's what I'm trying to say. So one of the things that we're talking about here are how do you pass this down to your heirs, right? And what happens is when you pass assets down to your heirs, after you pass away, it's called step up basis. It happens in real estate and it happens in stocks. So, your assets, at the time that you pass away, your heirs get them at that value, whatever their growth is. So, again, let's talk about examples here. Let's say you own a house, and that house you bought for $500,000. But when you pass away, the house is now worth $1 million. Well, that 500,000 in gain, if you had sold that house, then you would have to deal with the capital gains on that gain. And the way tax things are, you probably wouldn't have any at that. But let's say it grew a lot more. Then you would have capital gains taxes on the gains. You bought it for 500,000, you left it to your heirs at $1 million. Their value starts at $1 million. And so if they sold it right away, they would pay no taxes because their value starts at $1 million. Now, if they hold it and it goes from 1 million to 2 million for your heirs, and then they sell it, well, now they've got $1 million in gains. But the whole part of the buy, borrow, die strategy is that you buy assets, you pass those assets down to your heirs, and they pay no taxes on it because they get it at whatever value it is when you give it to them. So you started investing in the stock market and you only put in $100,000. However, you kept those stocks for 20 years and they're now worth $500,000. Your heirs get $500,000. And even if they sold it, they wouldn't pay taxes because all they have is $500,000, no gain. And so that's the beauty of this. Now, we have to also deal with estate taxes. And that's something that people don't talk about. The federal estate taxes. So for 2025, the federal state tax exemption, right? Now, I don't know how many of you know this, and put a turtle in the chat if you've heard of the buy, borrow, die strategy. But the federal estate tax exemption is in 2025 because this changes. But it's 13.99 million. So you can leave up to 13.99 million. That's as an individual, right? You could leave that amount to your heirs and not pay federal taxes. So there's no federal taxes. Now, depending on your state, you're going to have to deal with your state. And no one knows because that varies, by state. So move to a state that doesn't have that kind of taxes. I moved to Alabama because they do not tax your government pension. And at the time that I was looking to retire, I looked at how many states do not tax your government pension. And at the time, I was only looking at a federal pension, and my wife has a pension from the state of Maryland. They don't tax either one in Alabama. But at the time, and this was 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, because I was looking ahead of time, there were only 13 states that did not tax your government pension. And so I had to pick one of those 13 states to live in. And so what I said was, which state has a lower cost of living than the state of Maryland? And where I chose in Alabama, it was 30% less than the cost of living in Maryland. So I immediately gave myself a 30% raise. See, this is the way you think when you're investing and building wealth. And so what did I do with that 30% that I was not spending in the state of Maryland? I invested it. So I have been investing 30% more in retirement than I was spending living in Maryland. And we all know that I'm going for a 70% savings rate. However, I just looked last night because I just got a paycheck. I just looked last night and I'm down to 38% on my savings rate. That's just a quick update. We'll go through more, at my end of month wrap up. But I'm down to 38%. So now for a married couple, you basically double that to 27.98 million. Now, if you're leaving your heirs 27.98 million, then you're doing okay, right? You are not struggling if that's how much money you have when you pass away. And so, yes, Andy, I do I it sort of a 30% increase. How? Because if you think about this, Andy, I was being paid, and I'm still being paid, but I'm taking another little side trip. Everybody sit down because here goes Daryl off to the left again. I had four colleges at the time that I left Maryland. I'm now down to teaching in three colleges. However, the income that they were paying me in Maryland did not change. And we'll make up a number. I don't know what it was. It's been a little while. Oh, good morning. Loveth is here from Money Conversations. So I was making, we'll just say around 80,000 a year in Maryland, right? When I moved to Alabama, the colleges were still paying me 80,000 a year. However, my cost of living went down 30%. So that 80,000 a year went a lot farther. And what did I do with that excess money? I invested it. And so what happened? I bought more assets. And that's what we're talking about today is you're always buying assets. So you buy assets and then you can borrow against the assets once you've built up enough assets. Now, can you borrow against $100,000 in assets? Yeah, probably. However, you're not going to have a lot that you can get from that 100,000. What you want is you want 500,000. You want a million. You want to invest over a long period of time. This is not buy and sell, buy and sell, buy and sell. No. Keep growing your assets, whatever that looks like for you. As we mentioned, you don't have to do real estate. You don't have to do the stock market. You could do whatever you're comfortable doing. Hi, Bambi. Great to see you. And so it's whatever you feel comfortable investing in and whatever you are knowledgeable about, right? I can tell you, I lose money when I invest in things I don't understand, right? When I have a friend who makes tons of money in the crypto, and he says, Daryl, you need to invest in this. He understands what it is, I do not. And what I've learned over the years is if I don't understand it, I'm not putting my money there. So we've now talked about the buy strategy, which is buy assets. Whatever your assets are that are appreciating assets. Don't just buy things that go down in value. And Andy Munn, he and his wife, they collect cards. And so I was just sending him a message yesterday that if I was a card collector, I would be looking at their value. Again, what would I do? I would borrow against the value of my card collection. That's me as being a collector. However, that's not everyone's reason for collecting. It's just the love of collecting. So no one's saying borrow money against your collection. But my point is, as an investor, I am accumulating assets. Someday I want those assets, which in my case is real estate, to pay for my lifestyle. Yes, I want monthly cash flow to pay for my housing or pay for my mortgage or pay for my, if I had a car payment, which I don't, to pay a car payment. Now, in the future, do I want to pay cash for a car? Yes. Have I ever done that? No. So I have dreams of a better financial position in the future. And will that happen? We don't know. but we are going to try. So let's talk last about the die part. We talked about buying assets. We talked about borrowing against your assets. Hopefully, and I'll just talk about my case because this is not financial advice. In my case, I would borrow very conservatively. That's just me, that's just who I am. So I would not be a cowboy out there saying, well, I'm going to borrow a ton and then go invest a ton in something else and hope that it all goes up. And yeah, that's just not me. So, um, so now we talked about the step up basis, which is really the secret sauce to this whole strategy. And this is why the billionaires do it. So they can pass on billions to their heirs, right? Now, there are other ways to avoid taxes, and we're not talking about doing illegal tax avoidance, but what we're talking about is legally not paying taxes based on the tax code. And so, yes, you can donate money to charity, and that can help you with your taxes, even though I'm not a tax guy. So, we're not giving tax advice here either. But I have learned these various different things, like charitable distributions. Am I doing that? No. What I am doing is I have a trust that says my rental properties cannot be sold, even after I pass away, because I want them to keep appreciating in value. And as rents go up over time, because they sort of go with inflation, that's why rental properties are a good hedge against inflation. They tend to go up, not at the same amount as inflation, sometimes more than inflation, sometimes less than inflation. But because inflation goes up annually, rental income goes up annually. So, in theory, unless you have a rental property that you have owned for many, many years with the same tenant and you don't want to raise their rent, a lot of landlords raise the rent just a little bit every year. So let's just say over 10 years or 20 years, your rental property income is going to go up and it will somewhat keep up with inflation. And so all of these things are the reason that you want to give that future income, right? So in my case, I have a trust and the future rental income will support my wife's lifestyle after I'm gone. Will she need that amount of money? Probably not. And then after my wife is gone, and this is as my trust sits today, I'm going to be updating it at the end of the year, but and everyone should have a trust. Sorry for going off on a whole different topic. But as it stands today, my wife has income for the rest of her life, which again increases every year, and we don't know what she's going to start off with. Let's just say that she starts off with getting $1,000 a month. Well, if I'm going to live until 90 to 99, like that calculator that I just did in my last video, well, by that time, and my wife's younger than me, she could be getting $10,000 a month for the rest of her life. And then after that, the assets are sold and donated to charity. So we don't know how much those assets will be in 30 years that will all get donated to charity. And so that can be changed because it's not an irrevocable trust. In that, if I decide that I have family members, for example, that I in the future want to give a portion of my trust to, I can do that. But I'm telling you how it stands today. And so let's talk about what happens. The IRS resets the asset's cost to whatever the fair market value is when you pass away. So your heirs, whenever you sell or you don't, you give it to your heirs as you pass it down, you're not selling it. They get that fair market value according to the IRS. Oh, I'm sorry too, Bambi. Um, and being sued is a whole nother thing that we should talk about, and we should talk about that probably in another video. Um, and maybe I will make that another live, is asset protection, because we're talking about building assets. However, as you build these assets, you could possibly be sued because there's always someone looking to take your assets. And so I am currently going through asset protection. Now, if you can imagine, when I was homeless, I didn't have any assets. So, how did I go from being homeless and no assets to actually having assets and having to protect the assets because of lawsuits? And so I'm learning all of this with my new tax advisor that I mentioned a few months ago. And my new tax advisor is telling me, Daryl, you need to have this kind of insurance in case you get sued. You need to do this with your rental properties so that you do not have yourself exposed. As I mentioned, I have 50% equity. If a lawyer sees 50% equity, they'll say, well, let's go sue him. But what if a lawyer sees that there is no equity? Now, I'm not saying that you can hide the equity, but what I am saying is there are strategies that you can use to protect the assets that you have so that you could keep those assets to pass them down to your heirs. And as you all build wealth on YouTube, because I see a lot of you growing on YouTube, and I see YouTube giving you a lot of income where you can someday invest that YouTube income to get you more assets to build you more income. So protect those. So I'm going to make a note in my head, which I won't remember 10 minutes after the live is over, to do another video about asset protection, because that is an important thing for us to talk about, because you are going to build wealth. This is not about saying, well, you're always going to be poor and you're always going to have nothing. No, trust me. If you're watching my channel, you either have wealth, you're on your way to building wealth, you're on your way to getting out of debt so that you can start building wealth. It's all part of the process. So when I came out of the homeless shelter, I had a lot of debt. I had credit cards that had been closed, and they weren't in collections, but they had been written off with the IRS. I still had to pay all of those back to rebuild my credit. And has it taken me 30 years to get back close to an 800 credit score? Once or twice I've been over 800, but now we're back down into the 760s or something of that nature. However, what's my goal? Build it back up to over 800. I always have a goal of improving my life and doing better. Sometimes I take a step backwards. Sometimes I'll have a bathroom floor in one of my rentals that needs to be redone, and it will suck up all my cash flow. Okay? We take a little small step backwards, but over the long term, over the next 10 years, 20 years, we are growing, and we're growing assets. You know, Mommy Money Getter is in here, and she's talking about that. She has multiple businesses and multiple streams of income, but she also has daughters to take care of. So we have things in life to take care of. We are not all out here free to just spend money and invest. We have lives. We have family. We may have adult children that we are helping. See, we may have other family members. Some of us have parents that we are helping. So this is not everybody has free cash just to put out there. Life is still happening while we're building wealth, and we build wealth just a little bit at a time. As you all see, I'm putting $50 each time I have some income coming in, whether it's a paycheck from teaching, whether it's my pension once a month. I put $50 into my high yield savings account. So I'm building that muscle a little bit tiny at a time so that when I get a big chunk of money, that muscle will already be there to put that money to the side. See, and so I am learning how to, and T does this, she puts money in categories, but I am learning how to put my money in categories. What I did was I just dumped it all on debt, then I dumped it all in investing, and that's what I did to try to build wealth. Well, now I'm at a stage now that I'm trying to catch up to what T is doing, which is have different categories. Put some of the money in a travel category so that I'm not putting my travel on my credit card and then dumping my next paycheck on the credit card to pay it off. And that's how I used to operate, and I still operate that way. However, I've got some friends that are going to work with me later this month and teach me how to put money in categories. And that's what this is all about. We're all teaching each other. And Tiger says, what we do, buckets for everything. See, and I'm learning, like Julie. Julie has a cash bucket, then she has a medium term investing bucket, and then she has a long term investing bucket rather. And I am going to have categories like T does. When she talks about her savings rate, she talks about a percentage in each category. And I've got to learn that. That's a little bit complex for me to understand. However, I'm going to learn it and I'm going to teach myself how to save in different categories. And T said that she's terrified of being a landlord because real estate is not for everyone, especially in the beginning. You have to be able to weather the gut punches. And I will tell you guys, my first rental property that I had, actually my second, which was a duplex. I had that duplex in Vermont for 18 years and didn't buy a second rental property for 18 years because, one, I did not know how. I had to learn how to buy more rental properties. So people had to teach me. I didn't just all of a sudden come up with what I know today. So on this channel, we're all teaching each other different things. I'm learning from T, somebody else may be learning from me, but the point is that you have to do what's comfortable for you. I took a lot of gut punches with that duplex in Vermont. I had people growing chickens in my living room. Okay, and Dave Ramsey, he talks about, a rental property and some guy changing the oil on his Harley in your living room. That I didn't have because they couldn't fit the Harley through the door, right? But trust me, renters are very creative. Okay, if you say, how can a person do X, Y, and Z? It's been done. And this is why I have a property management company and I do not manage my own rentals. I managed that rental in Vermont for many, many years. Out of the 18 years, at least 15 of those years, I managed that property myself from a long distance. And you want to talk about a disaster for 15 years. The only saving grace to that property was that it paid for itself over time. A lot of times I had to come out of pocket from my W-2 income to make that payment. We're talking almost every other month I had to come out of my pocket. But that property over time, gave me my money back. So when I sold it, I had $100,000 in capital gains. And then, of course, I had to pay taxes on that. But my point is, I paid $2,000 down on that property. Now, it went through the 2008 market crash where it lost like 50% of its value. But it came back over time And I ended up walking away with $100,000. And I also, again, using the buy, borrow, die strategy, I borrowed money against the equity in that property to buy a property here in Alabama. So, one of my very first rentals here in Alabama, I borrowed the money from my duplex in Vermont. So, again, I was using the buy, borrow, die strategy without ever even knowing that I was doing that. But someone had to teach me that you can pull equity out of a property and use that equity to buy another property. And so the other way, because we're getting close to the end here, the other way that I've done this is when I refinance properties, because I'm not taking cash out, the bank says your properties have gone up in value, so we're going to give you this one property free and clear. Right now, my property is very low cost property, so I'm not getting a free and clear $1 million property. I'm getting free and clear a $50,000 property. But my point is that I get a property free and clear. I can then use that $50,000 property as collateral on a loan to get more properties. See, your assets are bringing you more assets. When you're investing, you send your dollars out there and tell them to bring back more dollars. And that's what you do. And so T is building wealth in her own way. She's not investing in real estate, which I'm telling you is not for everyone. I'm sort of a little bit past the part of, because I've been doing it for a while, I'm past the part of taking the gut punches, right? If you can accumulate enough where if one renter doesn't pay, another two renters cover with cash flow what that one renter didn't pay, right? If you have free and clear rentals, I don't. I owe a ton of money on these things. If you have free and clear rentals, you are doing fabulous. You don't need but a few free and clear rentals to have that kind of cash flow. Now, if T paid for a rental property in cash, and I'm not saying T that you can do this, I'm just saying if T paid for a rental property in cash, that would alleviate some of the trepidation that she may have, because now you're not worried about paying a mortgage. Yes, you're still going to have repairs that are going to hit you, like that water heater that you and your husband had that went out. You're going to have that, but you're also going to have an emergency fund set aside for those emergencies. See, so some people need to buy rental properties free and clear and in cash. I just did not have the funds to do that when I started. So what we've talked about is we've talked about the buy strategy, which is always buying assets, right? Just no matter what you do and what you invest in, continue to buy assets. And T, I absolutely agree. She said she just doesn't want to deal with it. And that's why I have property management. And that's why I pay them 10% of my rent every month, is because I do not want to deal with it. See, I want to travel, right? And they sort of call this mailbox money, right? Where you just get the money every month. Well, I'm not at that point yet, but eventually, as my rentals are paid down and as I increase the cash flow, it will be just money that comes in the mail every month. The property management company takes care of the rental. They take care of the repairs. They ensure that you get renters in. So therefore, it's something you don't have to deal with. It's more like buying a stock, if you really step away like that. And T, I'm not trying to convince you to buy real estate. I'm just saying this is what I do, because I too do not want to be bothered with it. And T and I are both building wealth two different ways, but we're doing it passively as possible. So, so T and I, there are so many ways to build wealth, and we're running up on our time here. But I'm so happy that doing these lives just on my cell phone data, not using the Wi-Fi here at the RV, which apparently that company Wi-Fi sucks. So this is 2 weeks in a row that I've had a successful live just using my Verizon data on my cell phone. So that's what we will continue doing until I have a better company for getting Wi-Fi. And we'll just have to test that out in the future. But I want to thank everybody for coming by and coming to my live about the buy, borrow, die strategy. And I hope that in whatever way you use it, conservatively in my case, that you use your assets to bring back and buy you more assets so that in the future you're multiplying your wealth. So I'm going to leave you with this quote: every penny saved is another penny towards your future financial freedom. So remember, never let your past determine your future. And Money Conversations, love it. Thank you so much for coming. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by and supporting my live. And I will see you all next week. Oh, and T said, I'm going to end with this. T said that her daughter is a property manager. See, that right there gives her a competitive advantage should she ever decide to invest in real estate. We all have a competitive advantage. I've talked about that in the past. Whatever your competitive advantage is, use it. Thank you all so much and have a great week.